joined now by Trevor Phillips, Times columnist, former head of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Trevor, welcome back to Spectator TV. Now, you'll have seen research this week indicating that nearly 3/4 of Black Brits wouldn't take the vaccine. Do you think it's really that high?
Yes, I do. I think that there probably is a very high level of vaccine reluctance or vaccine skepticism amongst minorities. And I make the distinction because reluctance is really about lack of knowledge or lack of understanding. Skepticism is something rather more conscious and positive. And I think amongst some minorities, there is a significant level of skepticism. They know perfectly well what's being said about it, they just don't agree with it.
What's the cause of this skepticism, if to use your word, because it is quite marked. I see from this research, 72% of Black Britons unlikely to get vaccinated, they claim. 42% of those from Pakistan and Bangladesh origin. It's still a high number, but it's a lot lower than 72, but also some quite high, what can I call it, anti-vax sentiment among East Europeans too. Yes. Now that's quite a varied group, from Black Britons to British citizens of Pakistani and Bangladesh origin to those from East European. What's causing this skepticism in your view?
Well, I think there are a couple of things going on here, and I'll just preface it by saying that a big part of this problem is that the government and the authorities have made a big play in the last 6 or 7 months of saying how much they recognize that ethnic minorities are more susceptible or more at risk. Actually, they don't know that. They haven't really done the work. We don't know the data. The government says stuff, but actually it can't back it up. And I can go into more detail if you want.
No, I understand that.
Why that's such a big problem. Because it's a big issue in convincing some of these groups. Why do I think that there is vaccine reluctance or skepticism? Well, first of all, I just don't buy this idea that's being put around, and ministers say this, that, oh, it's all about language and the communication's not reaching them. If you look at the ONS data, the proportion of people in this country who do not speak English well enough to understand that kind of information is 1.3%. The highest level of lack of language proficiency is Bangladeshi women, 5%. So this idea that basically it's all about giving the information to them in their languages and so on, brackets, they're all a bit backward, I just hate. I really despise it, because actually it's a good way for officialdom to pretend that actually it's the fault of these minority communities. And secondly, what it suggests is that these people just don't know what's going on. If they, if we educated them a bit better, they'd think the same as us. And it's a failure to recognize that actually some of the communities involved just take a different view about risk and about levels of the value of vaccine. And there's one other thing which may explain partly why the Black figure, let's call it, though that covers a whole multitude of kinds of people, is so high. And that is simply distrust of authority. Something similar is true in the United States, where African Americans are displaying significant levels of resistance to taking the vaccine. And what we think is going on there is very simply, we don't believe you. And actually, everything you've done in the past has really shafted us. And there's one other small point which perhaps we ought to think about, and which, I'm completely pro the vaccine. But one of the questions that one might ask, actually, if you were from some minority backgrounds, is, has this been tested on people like me? And actually what we know about the way that the pharma companies carry out their testing is that they always do have a deficit in the proportion of people from minorities.
You're another distinguished British citizen from a Caribbean background, Jeff Palmer, who was writing in the Mail this week. He also mentioned the issue of trust. he also wrote, and I remain to be convinced about this, in your take, that there were just too many white people up on that stage from public school backgrounds, and that was the reason. Can that really explain 72%?
Well, full disclosure, Jeff has been a family friend, interestingly enough, from the time he was a great friend of my older brother. So I've known him since I was 6 years old, and I have great regard for him. I think he's a brilliant scientist and so forth. I think he's got it around his neck on this one. I think actually the idea that if you just had a few black faces on the platform, it's a variety of the same thing that actually, if you basically talk to the chiefs, then the chiefs will talk to the Indians, and then it'll all be all right. I just think this is nonsense. The truth of the matter is that people are fully conscious, by and large, of what they're being told, but for substantial reasons, some to do with cultural background, maybe religious beliefs, but also skepticism about what they're being told by any authority in this country. They are not convinced. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because if you're going to remedy that, simply to giving them the same information just in another language isn't going to crack it. You've got to address the fact that people have different points of view. And this, in a way, goes to the heart of a debate that we've been having 20 years about multiculturalism. That, you can all go kumbaya and say, okay, we're all the same under the skin and all the rest of it. But there will come a moment, and we may be coming to one, where what we discover is that there are some people who sincerely believe something which is completely at odds with what the majority of the country believes, and what the majority of the country believes to be at odds with the interest of the community as a whole. And at that point, somebody's got to make a decision about how you deal with that.
Well, to ask my favorite Leninist question, what is to be done?
Well, I think the first thing is that we, you know that I bang on about this. We've got to have proper information. I mean, right now, everybody says constantly their minorities are at greater risk. Well, actually, the latest data from the NHS on mortality shows that the proportion of people who have died who are white is 86%, which is exactly the number that white people represent in the population as a whole. So first of all, we need to stop spinning a narrative, which is basically the one that people would like to be true because it solves all sorts of problems, and deal with the facts, and that needs some work. Secondly, and also, if you're going to persuade people, you've got to show them some actual data. So I would say that we first need to understand who is at risk, and secondly, we need to understand better which communities are truly reluctant. Saying black people are more reluctant, which includes Somalis and Ghanaians and Barbadians, who all have completely different outlooks. You know, some might be Muslims, some might be Christians. We need to understand who is really vaccine skeptic and why before we tackle the problem. So I think we need to do a bit more research and be a bit more honest about this before we start throwing solutions which frankly will have no impact into the pot.
I mentioned that I was skeptical of Jeff Pamela's complaint about too many public school boys giving out the message. But I do also see there is some validity in giving out messages to particular groups in the manner, in the language, by people that they regard as role models and that they look up to as exemplars of the communities that they come from. And I'm not sure the government has done much or any of that. I mean, I know he's a busy young man with a lot to do already, but someone like Marcus Rashford or Stormzy even, people like that, could they not make a difference if the government got them on side on this?
Only if they actually had a proper answer. I mean, the fact that somebody is black is telling you something that you think is nonsense isn't going to persuade you any more than if somebody who's white gives you something, an answer that you think is nonsense. I think whoever the messenger is, we've got to get the message right first. And my concern here is that the way we're dealing with this somehow suggests that the only reason that people might be vaccine skeptic is because they just don't understand modern white people's ways. I think we first have to address what is it that they actually are concerned about, and make sure that we actually have a proper answer. By the way, I mean, one of the other things that's being said is it's all about the conspiracy theories that are going around, and that actually somehow minorities are more susceptible to conspiracy theories on Twitter. I mean, give me a break. Give me a break. I mean, you know, we're no more likely to listen to this drivel than anybody else. You know, so first of all, I think the fundamental thing is I get your point, but the first thing is treat the minority skepticism with the seriousness it deserves. Listen to why people think that there's a problem and answer it scientifically with proper data if we can. Who gives the message? I don't care about. You may be right. Marcus Rashford would be more listened to than anybody else. But actually, I'm not sure that's true. I think that the average minority person will say, Marcus Rashford knows about football, but he absolutely does not know about sticking needles in my arm. So the messenger does matter, but what matters more is the message.
I understand. Well, we know government people watch Spectator TV, so I hope they were listening to you, Trevor Phillips, and what you had to say there. Thanks for joining us again.
My pleasure, as always, Andrew. Thank you.